The last time we talked about the LMB, we were discussing about the hypothetical scenario of how things would play out if they were to come up against the true sons on the battlefield. While the vast majority of you agreed that there really was no contest, and that their training, tactics, weapons and equipment were far superior, what if we were to put them up against another foe from a similar background? In this video we'll be talking about the possible outcome if the Last Man Battalion, back in their heyday when they were at their most powerful, went head to head with the Black Tusk. The Last Man Battalion, or LMB, is a private military company founded by Charles Bliss, a highly decorated former officer of the United States Army's Special Forces. Composed almost entirely of former commandos from the Army's elite 75th Ranger Regiment and the CIA's much-feared Special Operations Group, the LMB employs some of the most highly trained and lethal mercenary soldiers in the world. Before the green poison hit the streets of New York, the LMB was deployed in classified locations across the western side of Asia and North Africa. But after the outbreak, a number of Wall Street businesses came together to hire them to protect their servers and physical assets, which were stored deep inside the lower Manhattan quarantine zone. As panic in the financial district began to spiral out of control, Bliss began to clash with local authorities. In his eyes, their actions, or lack of, had no place in a war zone. Eventually the quarantine in the center of Manhattan was established, and when the JTF were pulled back, the LMB found themselves abandoned. After a number of days being cut off and subjected to the brutal aftermath of a city that was left to fend for itself, Bliss decided that the only course of action was to retake New York City himself and establish a new martial order. Bliss not only disobeyed a direct order, he executed the JTF officer in charge. The LMB are convinced that not only the city but the entire nation would collapse under the chaos that is unfolding during the pandemic, but it is them who would help America come out of this and see the other side. Their objective is to gain full control of New York and then use their newly created city-state as a base to create a new world order, one where only those with strength of will and character survive. The Black Tusk is a large private military company. Although their origins for the most part have been deliberately redacted from official records, reports show that they are composed of both military and paramilitary units, with a long history of working for undisclosed elements of the United States government. The Black Tusk operatives have been active in everything from covert regime change operations to on-the-ground counterinsurgency efforts in Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and North Africa. In the hours following the outbreak in New York City, before the full extent of the crisis was even known, the Black Tusk units and equipment were starting to be shipped back to the United States, which leads to the question of their involvement. But this goes much deeper than the PMC. The people who are responsible for employing the Black Tusk are still unknown. But what is apparent at this stage is that they are attempting to use this chaotic time to take control of the country. Division reports show that the Black Tusk have already secured key strategic locations around the US, including military bases, power grid and general utility infrastructure, communication hubs, financial institutions, and high-tech corporate campuses. In more recent times, they've been called into Washington, D.C. to neutralize federal resistance, counter the division activation, and take control of the Capitol. While still a PMC who has been employed to carry out someone else's agenda, a large portion of their leadership believes in the vision of those who are calling the shots. The idea of abolishing the current way of doing things and establishing a new world order only further fuels their drive to keep on track, as they believe what they're doing is needed to have the United States come out on top. This belief gives the Black Tusk the unwavered ability to remove any threats that may hinder this future development of the country, whether it be US soldiers, national security operatives like the division, and civilians. Both the Black Tusk and the LMB have quite a number of roles within their ranks, from the assault, rushers, throwers and snipers, all the way through to the support, engineers and heavies. These two factions are structured in a very similar way, with only very minor differences between the classes. The only real difference being, due to a mutual agreement with Aaron Keener, a number of former division agents turned rogue have joined the LMB forces as squad leaders or commanding officers. LMB riflemen make up the bulk of their forces, They use assault rifles and flashbang or stun grenades. They are very well trained and should be watched at all times, as they are constantly trying to flank enemies while they're distracted. The LMB snipers are powerful and accurate. Any threats caught out in the open will quickly be downed. Yet staying in cover isn't the answer either. The LMB scouts are fast and will rush straight towards the enemy with their semi-automatic shotguns. And if they fail, there are the grenadiers with grenade launchers and heavy gunners laying down suppressive fire from medium range. On top of this, they have medics with powerful healing stations, which will quickly undo any progress made by the opposing force if left unchecked. Then there are the first wave rogue agents, who are deadly at all range and utilise a number of SHD tech to further tip the battle in the LMB's favour. Much like the LMB, the bulk of the Black Tusk soldiers are made up of the assault class. These units are well trained and highly proficient in the use of cover-to-cover movement. Soldiers will do their best to split up and surround their foes, forcing them to back up into a corner. Once locked down, the throwers step in. Using airburst grenade launchers, they are able to deal massive damage to targets behind cover, or disorientate, bringing them back out into the open. But they also have drone operators, who utilise aerial-based demolition drones to laser onto targets and flush them out of cover. Black Tusk snipers are skilled at range, but are more than capable if enemies get too close. While utilising cover, they will swiftly move around the outside of the conflict area, setting up decoy lenses to confuse enemies around their position, buying them extra time to scope in on their targets. On top of this, they will deploy drones that will seek out enemies and stun them, granting them an even greater window of opportunity for a clear shot. The Black Tusk also have an answer for foes who have a greater arsenal of firepower. The controller class is responsible for the unmanned ground vehicles, like the heavily armoured and well-equipped mini-tanks. If outnumbered, the tank class is well suited to the role of halting enemy advances by laying down suppressive fire from their chain-fed minigun while absorbing a considerable amount of damage. However, heavy use of equipment and drones against the Black Tusk isn't necessarily the answer either. Their medic class isn't just skilled in keeping their allies alive, but is also equipped with EMP jammers, able to disable any machinery on the battlefield. Unlike the majority of the other factions, the LMB and the Black Tusk existed before the outbreak. They are both PMCs with vast experience in overseas conflict zones, with members having been recruited after serving in the US Armed Forces. The Last Man Battalion is built up almost entirely of former commandos from the Army's elite 75th Ranger Regiment and the CIA's Special Operations Group. The Black Tusk have handpicked their soldiers from militaries, other PMCs, and academies throughout America. Their troops have been chosen for their skills in highly specialised areas, including reconnaissance and surveillance, to technology, equipment, and weapon experts. Although not always the case with private military companies, the Last Man Battalion have spared no expense in equipping their troops with the latest and greatest when it comes to weapons and military gear. They are far more heavily armed than even the most well-funded military corps, and this is only further supported by the rogue division agents who provide field support and the advanced SHD tech and weaponry. When it comes to equipment, technology, and weaponry, the LMB are vastly superior to what almost all other factions have at their disposal. But then we have the Black Tusk. With seemingly limitless financial backing, their equipment isn't just state-of-the-art, it's practically unattainable to the bulk of their foes. Their weaponry, combat gear, and technology is next level. They have a wide range of drone technology, EMPs, mines, support stations, and mini-tanks. Experimental tech like warhounds, marauder drones, and the Razorback weapons deployment platform. The Last Man Battalion is a private military company consisting of soldiers who are highly trained former United States Special Forces. After the dollar flu struck New York, the LMB were brought back into the country to assist the wealthy. They have returned from conflict zones overseas, and they aren't particularly happy with being thrown into the centre of where the epidemic first started. Compared to other factions in the Manhattan quarantine zones, the LMB have far more combat specialists, with top-grade military gear and weapons, and their defensive positions were more heavily fortified. After they were then abandoned by the JTF, they took it upon themselves to correct the horrible job that the government was doing. Using their own form of strict martial law, they are prepared to use all means necessary to ensure that the city, and then the country, survives these events. Then there is the Black Tusk, also a private military company, but they weren't working on their own. The Black Tusk was hired by an unknown organisation to pave the way for a new dynasty, and are supported by cutting-edge field technologies and military-grade spec ops vehicles that can deploy troops rapidly anywhere. They have a very specific set of goals. Eliminate all hostile factions and groups in Washington, D.C., suppress civil unrest, disarm and control the settlements, and to neutralize the Strategic Homeland Division and any armed forces allied to it. But unlike other factions in both New York City and Washington, D.C., who share a similar goal, the Black Tusk have an extremely high level of backing from their employer. But not just from a financial aspect, they are also able to provide unusually precise intel on everything and everyone around them. While the LMB and Black Tusk are similar in a number of ways, with the bulk of their soldiers being made up of former military and special forces, plus the fact they both have vast experience in overseas conflict zones, and obviously they're both PMCs. If this is all we had to go on, this fight would be fairly even. However, if we start at the most basic level, the Black Tusk already starts to pull ahead. Although we aren't given any specific number, the sheer size of these groups seems to be considerably different. The LMB isn't a small force by any means, but in comparison to the Black Tusk, they're only a small blip on the radar. We need to remember that we're only fighting a small portion of the Black Tusk in-game, the Black Tusk Special Unit, or BTSU. Other than the stories of multiple facilities being captured around the country, we really haven't seen the bulk of their forces. But for the purpose of this, let's just say that the BTSU numbers are the entirety of the Black Tusk. Their training and tactics on the battlefield are relatively on par. They both utilize cover well and display strong discipline in even the most difficult of situations. However, this is where the Black Tusk's mysterious employer comes in. The seemingly limitless funds they're able to provide has them coming back from every engagement stronger than they were beforehand. Even against the SHD, after every loss, they return somewhere else with even greater numbers and more powerful weapons. An argument could be made in favour of the LMB with their armoured personnel carrier in the Falcon's Lost incursion, but this really was a one-off, and is certainly not to the same level of what was seen from the Black Tusk. It isn't the numbers, or even necessarily the funding that separates the Black Tusk. It's their access to technology that is even greater than what the SHD has to offer. These unknown benefactors aren't just providing all the money in the world, they have some very obvious ties to the inner workings of the US government. From our time in the Pentagon and the DARPA labs, we can see that a number of the unmanned drones, like the Marauder-class quadcopter, the mini-tanks, and the Warhounds, have been developed here, but also the majority of the SHD tech. And the Black Tusk know that this is their advantage, heavily utilising this tech everywhere possible. Yes, the LMB have rogue agents in their ranks, but at that time their abilities were somewhat nerfed. It wasn't until later on that Kina was able to take full advantage of what they previously had at their disposal as division agents, when the rogue agent network was established. But even still, the Black Tusk has shown their ability to take out division agents prior to their attack on the capital. I know a lot of people refer to the White Tusk as being former LMB, therefore they must be better, but these are still Black Tusk troops for the most part. It's true that the Black Tusk absorbed the LMB into their ranks sometime after their leader was taken out, but they were then completely re-kitted out with gear and weaponry and added to existing Black Tusk units. Although I believe this hypothetical battle to be completely one-sided due to the technology aspect alone, I still don't think that this is their strongest attribute. The Black Tusk leadership has always been one step ahead. Their intel is far beyond anything that the other factions have at their disposal, and this includes the SHD. They're sort of like Kina in that way. Old Kina, not new Kina. That guy was a disappointment. Whoever these employers are, the Black Tusk are just their pawns. The inside information on its own makes them the most powerful faction that we've come across in the Division universe. We've had some small clues as to who they are with characters like Natalia Sokolova, but I believe she's only the tip of the iceberg as far as finding out their true identity. Potentially just another figurehead behind something much, much bigger. In the research for this video, I was really just left with the feeling of needing more. I think this long period of having no new content being added to the story is starting to affect me. Don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying going back and catching up on some of the stuff I never got around to talking about, and I'm looking forward to going through some of the prequel stuff that we'll be seeing in the Heart of Fire audiobook. I'm just really holding out for the next expansion to the story. There has just been so much left hanging. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!